Thank you for tuning in to the Calm Your Nervous System podcast, where you will learn to regulate your nervous system, not just calm it. I'm your host, Jenny Adams, and I'm a somatic coach who has recovered from debilitating ME and trauma. Alongside my guest experts, I'm here to share tips, stories, and debunk jargon, what is somatics anyway, about how you can regulate your nervous system so you don't have to live with chronic illness, burnout, or debilitating trauma for the rest of your life. A joyful life is possible! I thought I would start the first episode of this podcast by sharing my story and how I went from having debilitating ME, chronic fatigue, and chronic pain throughout a lot of my 20s and having to be quite heavily reliant on using a wheelchair or a mobility scooter to now living a full and joyful life where I can basically go and do whatever it is I want. So I will warn you, there might be some references of sexual trauma in this episode, so I will give you a heads up that might be coming. I won't be going into detail, so don't worry too much. But just in case you are sensitive to hearing things like that, I will give you a warning. So my ME, CFS, was kicked off by glandular fever when I was about 15. So here in the UK, I was doing my GCSEs. I was in year 11, so the last year of school. And I don't know where I caught it from. I know it's known as mono, or like the kissing disease. Genuinely don't know where it came from. And I just thought I had a cold, but it was extreme. My glands were so swollen that I could barely eat or drink, and I lost about 2 stone in about a week or two because I just couldn't take anything in. So I had this glandular fever. I missed all my GCSE mock exams, and I remember at that time feeling quite excluded, not very seen. I think I was kind of being forced to go to school, and I remember going on holiday, I think it was December, to Tenerife with one of my friends. And again, I had to just go out. I had to go out with everybody, and I was exhausted. And we will talk in this podcast about how listening to your body, conditionally in society, we just don't do. So from a very young age, before this age of 15, I had also been conditioned out of listening to my body. So I got this glandular fever when I was about 15. I don't think I did any of my GCSE mocks. Somehow managed to get 13 GCSEs. And I'll probably talk about my school years at some point along the lines here. So yeah, I eventually scraped through my GCSEs and got into college. Also at this time, I was in in an abusive relationship. It hadn't become abusive at this point yet. This was like a year in, and this was like, there's lots of manipulation going on and seeds being planted. And one of them was to pull me away from my friends. So when I finished school, I ended up going off to college. That's my life story. I met one of my best friends there, who I'm still friends with 16, 17 years later. So, everything happens for a reason, but this was one of his strategies. So I went off to college. I was on my own. I didn't really know anyone. I didn't know anybody when I started. I was completely on my own in this. My boyfriend at the time was very close by, and this was when a lot of the manipulation, a lot of the abuse really started. And I didn't have anyone to talk to. Now, I'm trained in compassionate inquiry, which is Gabor Mate's trauma method, approach, training. And one of the things that he talks about time and time again is the trauma is not in the thing that happened. It's in your body's response. And what makes something traumatic can also be the support you did or didn't have around the time. And unfortunately, this went on for 2.5 years of me not talking to anyone. So this really didn't help. I ended up kind of swallowing a lot of how I was feeling at the time. And stumbling through college, I was exhausted. I was really struggling to get into college. I could barely, I could walk, but not very far. And I remember starting to put some coping strategies in. Like when I was with my ex, he lived on a road on a hill. There was a bus that went from the bottom of his road that took longer to get to college, but it was like a 2-minute walk. Or there was a 10-minute walk up the hill to a bus that would take 5 minutes to get to college instead of 20 minutes. So I would have those debates quite often. Do I get the bus that takes me there in a quicker time, but there's a longer walk? Or do I take the bus that takes ages, but it's a 2-minute walk away? And I realise now there was lots of these coping strategies that started then and continued long into my illness. So I was just generally knackered. And I remember thinking at the time, adults just complain that like things hurt and they're tired a lot. So I thought, well, is this it? Is this what being an adult's like? And generally, you know, people are in college, they're tired. This was an extra level. So yeah, it took me 2.5 years to get away from this boyfriend. And I don't want to say he broke me. I felt broken at the time. My scars healed. I ended up in hospital a couple of times because of ways he'd injured me. I never went to the police. No one suspected anything. And that was pretty crap in itself, that no one clocked what was going on. But those scars have healed. Like the physical wounds have healed. It was the mental stuff that I'm still unpacking now. And I would say I've done a lot of work on myself in the last probably 5 or 6 years. I've been to a lot of therapy. I've been with coaches. I've done some intense trauma releasing stuff. It's layered. So I started therapy, and I will go into this. That was one layer. There are more underneath, and I don't think anyone can ever get to a point where they're like, I'm done. It's all good. It's gone. There's always going to be stuff that is hanging around that triggers you. If you've been through trauma, then there will always be stuff that hangs around. But it's to what level that affects your life. If it's stopping you from leaving the house, if it's causing you chronic illness, that is an issue. That can be where getting some support can be really helpful. I don't feel like I have it to that extent anymore, but there are definitely certain things. I am definitely more sensitive that still crop up. But the work has been done and is still continuing to be done. So I'm always working on myself. So I went through this relationship. There was physical abuse, there was sexual abuse, there was a lot of emotional manipulation, a lot of what I now know is gaslighting. That term wasn't around then. Lots of, I've told you this, why can't you remember? And I'm going, what's going on? Am I going crazy? Did he tell me this? Did I just forget? Am I a bad listener? Is my hearing okay? And I remember being gaslit to the extent that I remember going to the doctors and saying, I think my hearing's not working. And them sending me off to get a hearing test. And I look back now and I think, oh my God, my hearing is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. He was just playing tricks on me. And I could make him out to be, you know, this big, nasty, evil person. What I witnessed in their household, he had 3 older sisters and both his parents were together. He would kick the shit out of me some nights with his parents and his sisters upstairs. And no one said anything. So something in that household made that okay. And if I'd never seen anything happen between his parents, nothing was spoken about. But if they knew what was going on, and I'm pretty sure they did, his older sister at one point had come and said, you know, is he doing anything? Is he hurting? Is he hurting you? But I was so, you know, in his control that no, I was like, no, I'm fine. And I really wasn't. So there was something broken in that household that he was probably a victim of. If he witnessed this between his parents, if his parents did this to him, there's a reason that people do these things. They're not just born evil. Trauma affects everyone. And most people that inflict pain on others do it because they are holding so much of their own inner pain that they just can't bear to be alone in that. So they will share it with others by hurting them. So I have a lot of compassion now for him. It took me a long time to get here. He would pop up every couple of years after I broke up with him and try and get back in touch, try and apologise. And I was just like, fuck you, get out of my life. The only thing I want from you is give me some money so I can go to therapy. So yeah, I didn't want anything to do with him. So this all came out, and I actually remember a friend in college saying, I suspected something had happened or something wasn't right. So I would say, if anyone witnesses anything like this, has any suspicions, can you be that safe space for your friend to come to? You don't have to outright say, are you in a domestic violence situation? Does such and such hit you? Just let them know that you're there. And I think that's what I struggled with. I didn't feel like I had someone that was there that I could talk to. So I'd gone through this whilst I was in college. I broke up with him literally when I was doing my A-levels. So right at the end of college, I think I was 18 at the time, and then spent a year just trying to repair myself. So I don't really remember much about that year, to be honest. We did go travelling, actually, me and a couple of friends. We did our gap year. And we went off to Sri Lanka for a couple of weeks to work with kids. And that was like a year of a bit of freedom, a bit of like, who am I? And even when I was in Sri Lanka, I actually remember having to like go upstairs and have a lie down because I was just tired. I was tired all the time. I'm not the biggest fan of kids. Don't have any kids. I love my nieces to bits, but I also love giving them back when I'm tired at the end of the day. And yeah, we were working with orphaned children, and I was really looking forward to the second part of our trip, which was going to Thailand to work with animals. We were meant to be going to an elephant sanctuary, I think, and that got cancelled because there was some riots going on in Thailand at the time. So yeah, I was working with these kids, doing the bit my friends wanted to do. It wasn't really me. I still enjoyed my time out there, but I just remember feeling exhausted, and I think we'd have to walk like 2 kilometres from where we were staying to this orphanage through some like paddy fields. And even that, especially in like 30-degree heat, I got there and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm ready for a lie down now. And you had all these excitable children that want to play with you. So yeah, I was pretty knackered. And then it took a couple of years. It was probably 5 or 6 years of just kind of struggling through before I kind of hit my rock bottom. So I remember working at Bristol Airport when I would have been like 21-ish, and I had to start work at 4 a.m. I am not a morning person, and I was definitely defying my body by getting up at 2 o'clock to get in for work at 4 o'clock. And I remember having to ask for adaptations and doing this again in my next job, and just having the attitude of a lot of management and people around me, like, just go to bed earlier. You're lazy. Why can't you do what everyone else can do? And I just genuinely didn't understand it. And I had internalized, well, maybe I am just lazy. Maybe I need to go to bed earlier. But I think I'm doing that. What's wrong with me? And I realise now, my body functions best on probably about 9.5 hours sleep. When I just let my body do what it naturally wants, that's how much sleep I need. So if I'm giving myself 4 or 5 hours of broken sleep constantly, that does not end well. So I ended up working at the airport. I then got an admin job, and it was in this admin job that I had also met another lovely man. He wasn't. He had his own struggles, as everyone does, and he had his own disability, like a neurological condition that affects his feet. So he had to have, him and his family, because it's hereditary, they all needed a lot of quite intense surgery on their feet every couple of years. And then I rock up with suspected ME, the tired condition, and they love playing who's most disabled top trumps. So how I felt was never registered. So it was whilst I was with him that I was in this job, this admin job, and I will talk about boundaries because I had none at the time. And I'm sure in hindsight, I look back at this job and it was almost like they were trying to break me. They would constantly ask stuff that was just not within my remit. I started as admin and then the office manager quit and they didn't replace her. So they just gave me her job, but without a promotion or a pay rise. They just gave me all of her work. And then they were expecting me to stay on for like an extra 2 hours overtime a day. And then I'd need to be in earlier. And it was just constant, do this, do this, do this, do this. And I just didn't say no. I didn't realise I had a choice at the time. So they'd be emailing me at 10 o'clock at night and telling me off for things. They were also checking my own email, like my personal emails. I was logged into my Hotmail on my computer. And I realised now that's a massive boundary violation. So they were doing their best to... No, they weren't very supportive, I'll say that. I don't think anyone consciously was trying to break me. My boundaries were not very good, and sometimes people come along in life, they see the people that have crap boundaries and they push their stuff on them. Only we are responsible for what we can do. If someone is telling you to do something, is asking you to do something, it's within your right to say no. I realise that now because I realised that the hard way. So it was whilst I was in this job, I just remember my stress levels getting higher and higher and higher. I think I'd gone through a recent breakup as well. And it was one day I tried to get up to go to the toilet and I just couldn't. The toilet was about 10 steps away and I just didn't have the energy and I just burst into tears. I think I was probably having a panic attack. I just felt like I had no control over anything. And that was the point where my health was probably at its worst. I think the day before, I'm a big petrol head. Well, I've an electric car now. I've always loved cars. And the day before, I had spent the entire day detailing my car. And that means like intensely washing. For anyone that's not into detailing on cars, it's, cleaning it, waxing it, polishing it, getting the wheels looking perfect, not just taking it to your local car wash because they scratch the paint. But anyway, I'd spent the whole day doing this, whilst also simultaneously, I think, baking a batch of brownies and doing lots of ignoring what my body was telling me, which was probably to rest. And I definitely had an addiction to doing. So I'd spent the day before doing this. And as anyone who has experienced long COVID or ME, they know about PEM, so post-exertional malaise. You don't feel the effects of the thing you've done that day. It generally hits you. Mine was 2 days later. So I think 2 days after I'd spent the day intensely cleaning my car, then I ended up not being able to get up and go to the toilet, which was really scary. And at that point, I had to ask for help because I couldn't just fluff my way through this. I couldn't pretend that things were okay because they really were not okay. And that was really the start of my journey with ME. This had been affecting me for years, and I had been to the doctors numerous times for 8 years saying something's not right, and just been fobbed off with, it's probably depression, maybe it's stress related, here's some antidepressants, try this. And I never really felt like I was listened to. It was at this point where I said, look, I couldn't get up to go to the toilet. This is not depression. This is not right. I'm 23, 24. This is not normal. So then the investigation started. And I think it took me about 3 months. And thank God I did find a doctor who listened. And it was through my ex, the disabled one. One of his sisters had ME. And it was his family that were actually saying, well, do you think you might have this? Not that they were there to help with any of it, but they suspected. And I did some research into it. And it was then I went to the doctors and said, look, I think I've got this. Can you run the tests, do whatever is needed to see if I have it or not? So another set of blood tests, and they come back, everything's normal. And after about 3 months, she said, I'm going to monitor you. We're going to have a check-in every month. If it's still here after 3 months, I'm going to refer you to, I think it's the pain clinic or the ME clinic. This is at Southmead Hospital in Bristol. It's now a car park, the clinic I went to. So eventually I got this referral, and I remember going in and telling them, sitting down with someone in the NHS for more than 10 minutes and telling them my story. And they said, yeah, we think you've probably got ME. There's nothing we can do about it. It's just managing it. But we can send you to some pain management and some clinics, some groups on some courses that could be supportive. I remember going into the toilets in the hospital and bursting into tears because I was so happy that I finally had a diagnosis, that I wasn't going crazy. I'm not just lazy. I'm not just a bit tired. This is an actual thing, and it's finally been recognised. Someone has listened to me, and they can offer me some support. So I thought, okay, I'm going to get some support and I'm going to get over this. But expectations were set pretty low by the people that I was working with. So I was determined to do whatever I could to recover, to get better. But I soon had to realise that, from what the doctors told me, no, you don't recover from this. This is lifelong. There is no cure. We don't know what causes it. It's a diagnosis of exclusion, so we don't actually know what it is. There is no indicator. You're just going to have to learn to live with it. And then it got worse. So at the time, this was 2014, I was just exhausted. I'd get achy. Like, I remember working when I was a teenager and into my early 20s, working in shops for like 4 hours on a Saturday and just feeling like I'd been thrown down the stairs multiple times after every shift. Every single muscle in my body hurt, ached. I was exhausted. So I'd do my 4 hours and then I'd spend the whole of the next day sleeping. So about 6 months later, after I got this diagnosis, I was in quite a minor car accident. I was driving down a main road and someone came out of a side road and went into the passenger side of my car. I was only doing about 20 miles an hour. It was like a quiet residential street, but I got whiplash from it. And it shook me up pretty bad. And I even remember, and this makes me laugh now, just how much I have changed. One of my first thoughts when I got out of the car was, I'm going to be late for work, because I couldn't drive the car because the wheels were like stoved in. The wheels were facing up instead of sideways. So I remember texting someone in work saying, I think I'm going to be a bit late because I've been in a car accident. And my first thoughts were, I hope I'm not in trouble. I hope I'm not letting someone down. It wasn't, am I okay because I've just been in a car accident? And then the woman that hit me came out and shouted a whole load of abuse at me. So it was a big shock to my system when I was just driving to work one January morning. Did not expect that to happen. I remember getting to hospital and they were doing the tests on like how far can you move your neck, and they said, oh, everything's normal. I didn't feel like it was. I felt like I couldn't actually move as much as I normally could. In hindsight, I realise years later I got diagnosed with hypermobility. So partly what really didn't help in the car accident, because my ligaments are more lax, my bones will move around more, joints can slip out. So my head probably bashed around and flexed around a lot more than a non-hypermobile person would. And then when I go to hospital and they say, oh, everything looks normal, it might be normal on a scale of people without hypermobility. For me, it wasn't normal. I felt very restricted. I went to A&E and I think they might have given me some paracetamol, or I think they just gave me some, put an ice pack on it, put some heat on it, have a rest. So a couple of days later, I go back to work and all of this pain had crept in very quickly. I look back now and I can just, I can feel the tension in my body. Just everything tensed up. I was in shock. I was in pain. My fatigue was then irritating the pain. The pain was irritating the fatigue. And it took me 3 months before I got any kind of support, any kind of physiotherapy. In hindsight, again, I wish I had just paid for someone to help with my back, because the tissues, I realised, had probably knitted back into a dysfunctional position, and that exacerbated my pain. So this fairly minor car accident, I would say, disabled me for a good 5 or 6 years. And it took me that long to get a settlement. So this was early 2015. I remember getting my settlement through when lockdown hit in March 2020. So it was over 5 years of back and forthing with solicitors, trying to get private healthcare, because there's only so much the NHS can do. And I really needed the physios, the osteopath, needed some therapy as well, but didn't get any of that. So it was a pretty big claim. And even if they gave me £1 million, £10 million, I would not trade my health for anything. I realise now a lot of this has made my story, has made my journey, it's made me kind of who I am now. But I wouldn't wish it on anyone. And anyone, claiming whiplash to get 30 grand, oh, no. The shit I went through to get that, no. I would not wish to repeat that. So after I had this car accident, this was when I spent months really, really struggling with my health. I think around this time, my boyfriend at the time had just had quite major surgery about a month before. So he was completely bedbound and very reliant on me, like cooking him dinner and doing the chores, doing all the cleaning. I was also working full time, and I do not know how I was doing it. I had no social life. I was just running on adrenaline and fear, and I was barely even able to feed myself. And he was really, again, not supportive. I'd come home from work exhausted and he'd be screaming at me for not having dinner cooked properly, or just little things that anything I did was just not good enough, which again added to my stress. And I see this in people that I work with. If you're trying to heal and you're in either an unsafe environment or you're under a lot of stress, your body is telling you something, and healing is not what it's trying to tell you. It's trying to tell you to get away from a certain situation. Something isn't safe. You need to change something. Because otherwise, if I overwrote that and tried to get into a healing state, my body is very rightly telling me something's not right. But I didn't realise that at the time. So I pushed through with him. I pushed through. A lot of the reason I stayed with him, and my friend reminds me of this, is it was too much effort to change my address. I have ADHD. Things like that are difficult. Executive functioning. And he had a really nice dog. And I know this sounds mad. And he cheated on me. I valued myself very, very little. I realise now what a catch I am. And I don't see that in a big-headed way, but I value myself. I have a lot to bring, and I do not need to put up with shit from people. life is too short. I am worth more than being someone's unpaid worker for nothing, for no support, for nothing in return. I value myself a lot more now. But at the time, unfortunately, I didn't. And this was one of those situations where this was someone paying me attention, and no one pays me attention, so I'm going to follow along with this. And that was how I ended up in this relationship. So yeah, he cheated on me. He treated me like shit, and I stuck around for longer than I probably should have. I did leave eventually, thank God. And getting out of that relationship was very helpful to my health, because I would have been 24 at the time, and I went back to my mum's house, and I managed to get on my feet a little bit more. I managed to get a little bit more energy, because I was literally just going to work and coming home and sleeping, and my mum would cook dinner and look after the house and all the other things. So I was trying to focus my best on getting better. And yes, I could work full time, there were a lot of adaptations. So the things I was doing at the time, I would go into work with the stretchiest, easiest things to wear possible. So any kind of tight fitting clothing, nope. Anything with zips on, nope. I would try and wear like leggings or tights because I found them more comfortable than trousers. So I remember one day one of my friends in work coming up to me and saying, "Jenny, you okay?" I was like, "Yeah, I think so. Why?" I was never really okay in work. And I think I had my dress on back to front and inside out. So I was walking around with a label like at my neck. So this was the kind of state that I was turning up to work in. But I was petrified to ask for support or to be seen as weak, as if there was something wrong with me. So I would try and go above and beyond to prove myself, and I really did not have the energy. I'd turn up to meetings and they'd ask me to stand up and talk, and I would stand up for like 45 minutes because no one gave me the permission to do this seated. No one said, "Jenny, do you need a chair?" I wouldn't ask. And then I'd get really frustrated because all my energy went on just standing. So asking for support in these kinds of environments can be huge, because that can be the difference between you turning up and keeping a job when you ask for adaptations versus being too sick to actually work. So I wish I was a little bit more, I wish I voiced what I needed more often. But in my head, I thought everyone knew what I needed, and they didn't. I need to express that. No one can read my mind, and I have a mouth for a reason, so I can actually express these things. I was also working from home 1 day a week. This was obviously pre-pandemic, when a lot of workplaces didn't really let people work from home. So again, I had to kind of fight for that. And I went through a couple of jobs. I left this one, I started another job, and I was getting to the point where I was starting to get a bit of a voice. And I was going into these workplaces and saying, "Look, I have a great CV, I'm very capable, and I have ME. Sometimes, very occasionally, I need some time off to go to a hospital appointment, and I need some adaptation so I can continue to do all the great things that you have hired me for." There is also in this country the Equality Act, so the 2010 Equality Act, which is there to help people like I was, like you might be, that either have long-term conditions, disabilities, mental health conditions, etc. And that's the disabled part of it. There are also other ways to bring people into equality if you have a protected characteristic. There is a legal act there to protect us. So asking for reasonable adjustments, asking for support is a legal definition of something that they have to do. Now, it has to be reasonable. So if I turn up to a business with 3 people working there and I say, "You need to put in a 50 grand lift because I need to be able to get from the ground floor to the first floor," that might not be reasonable. But if I ask, can I work from home because the managers do it and this would really support my health, it's probably reasonable. But I wouldn't necessarily ask all the time. So I went through a couple of jobs, turning up, telling them, I can do all this stuff, but I need some support. And they would quite often say, yeah, sounds great. And then almost try and bully the ME out of me. I'd go in and I'd be quite honest, which took a lot of guts to actually turn up and say these things. And I think I took 2 jobs to a tribunal. One I got an interview for, they offered me the job, and then I disclosed that I had a health condition, and they stupidly, for them, put it in writing, because you've disclosed that you have a health condition, we're going to withdraw our job offer. So they were very obvious in their discrimination, and I took them to court. I think I got $2,000 out of it, which I was like, well, hey, $2,000. I realise that was a 60 or 70 grand a year job that I lost out on, and I was on 30. So me getting $2,000 in the grand scheme of things was probably a bit silly to settle that though. But anyway, hopefully they realised and will stop doing things like this to people. Another job I went into, I remember them saying to me, unless you're able to walk around a factory I think they wanted to send me to Eastern Europe somewhere. If you're not able to do that within your probation time, we're not going to keep you on. And I said, well, can't we do Skype? Do I have to go to a factory? I was working in procurement. I was a buyer. I'm not a labourer. I don't need to be in a factory in Eastern Europe for part of my job. And that was kind of their excuse to say, we're pushing you out. But it was quite obvious how they were doing it. So they were another one that got taken to a tribunal. And funnily enough, they're one of these companies that also cannot retain staff. And every probably 6 months, I get a call from a recruiter saying, oh, we've got a job vacancy at such and such. I've seen on your CV that you worked there before. Would you be interested in going back? I think one of them I was like, not over my dead body. Not a fucking chance. So yeah, every couple of months they pop up. So yeah, I would not go back there. They need some serious work. But anyway, took me a long time of attempting my best to try and work, and all my energy went into working. So there wasn't much left for socialising, for working on myself, for any outside work activities. I was just in a state of, I need to work because I don't know how I'm going to pay my rent. I don't know how I'm going to pay for my car. These are my needs. These are necessary things that I just don't know what I would do without. I think I'd run up quite a bit of debt at this point as well. And again, good old ADHD and impulse control. I spent a lot of my time, I think due to my trauma, spending money on stuff to try and make me feel better in the short term. So working or not working was not really out of the question. And often what I'd end up doing was feeling pushed out by a company, taking advantage of their sick leave, staying on sick for as long as I could because I was genuinely sick. I needed it. And then finding another job and saying, I'm not coming back because this isn't a healthy environment for me to be in. It then got to 2018, 19. I was in procurement. I was in a very well-established engineering and car firm that I will not name. And I was taken on as a contractor there. I was feeling a lot better by this point. I think it was 2019, and they were starting to hand out permanent jobs to people. And I thought, oh, great, I've got on well here. I've made some good changes. I've got some good friends there. I am going to apply for a permanent job. What was also going on was they had just hired a new intern who had started to sexually harass me in work. So he was constantly sending me messages on Skype, which is our internal communication system. Stupidly gave him my number. He was sending me very inappropriate pictures, constantly ringing and texting me. And some of this I would actually respond to. I didn't realise it was harassment, especially sexual harassment, for a while. I was just trying to be nice. And I was single at the time. And I've had this pattern where I've been nice to men, especially quite vulnerable men, and they have just latched onto me and got a little bit obsessive. And this was one of these. He was about 10 years younger than me as well, which is weird. No, probably not that much. He was quite a bit younger than me. Anyway, he'd come up to me in work and he'd be like pulling at my clothes, he'd be pulling my hair, he'd be standing like right over me, really close. He'd constantly be like pulling me out for, I need to come and talk to you. And again, boundaries. I was struggling to say no to this. And I think quite a few times when it was a chat, I would honour it and say, yeah, what's up? When he's coming up to me and he's pulling my hair and he's pulling at my clothes, I am turning around and being like, go away, leave me alone. So anyway, there was all this going on. And I remember sitting down with my manager and saying, well, what's going on with the permanent job situation? I think I applied a couple of months ago and I've not heard anything. Such and such has been offered one. What's going on? She basically said, we've looked at Skype and we've seen what's been going on between you. And I think I was actually airing how I felt, that I want to put in a case against this guy because he's sexually harassing me. And that was big for me to actually stand up and say that. And then she said, yeah, we've been looking through Skype and we've seen some of the conversations and you've been using inappropriate language. So if you go ahead and pursue this, then we aren't in a position to offer you a permanent job because you've got a tarnish on your record and we're not going to be hiring anyone with those. The inappropriate language I was using, as you probably know, can hear, I swear, I'm telling him to fuck off, back off, leave me alone, piss off, all of this. And they are completely ignoring how I'm feeling, what's going on here. And I remember feeling, quite upset around this because I really wanted a job here. It took me a couple of weeks to realise, hang on, if I'm working in a place that can't listen, when my basic human needs are not being met, and I'm literally being told if I bring a case of sexual harassment against someone, they're not going to offer me a job. What the fuck? No, I don't want to work here. Not a chance. And this was one of those, I think this was about May, and I think my contract ended in like June or July. And this was a point of like, oh God, what am I going to do? Shit, I need to find a job. Like, this was where I thought I was going, and now it isn't. This is one of those wonderful divine timing things. A couple of months later, our main supplier came along and offered me a permanent job on a contractor's salary with reasonable adjustments, with working from home. And this was a much higher bracket in the industry that I was in. This is like the top dogs of the place that I was in. So I was pretty pleased with that because they headhunted me. They were desperate for me to come and start. And my rebellious outgoing of this other company was for me to go, I know I've only got a week's notice. I'm going to Ibiza next week. Fuck you, I'm leaving. And that was what I did. So this was 2019. And obviously by this point, because I'd gone off to Ibiza, clearly I was feeling better. So I'm going to take this back to what was actually going on with my health. So 2015 to 2017-18 was probably the worst years that I have had with my health. I wasn't able to leave the house without using some kind of mobility aid. I couldn't walk more than probably about 50 metres without needing to sit down or something hurting. So I was really struggling with what I could do. Again, I had no social life, wasn't really going out and doing things. There were a few things that I really, really, really wanted to do. So, for example, in 2016, I remember going over to Cardiff to see Beyoncé. And this was around the time I don't think I had quite given in, accepted help. and asked or used a wheelchair. I could walk, so I would, but I really could not walk far. And I remember going to the stadium, and my very anxious mind at the time was planning. So I booked disabled tickets so I could bring someone with me, had some support. I'd booked disabled seats. So I turn up, I tell the guards this, and I have to traipse halfway around the stadium, and then you get inside the gates and you have to traipse halfway back again, and then there's like 6 flights of stairs you need to climb. So by the time I get even to my steps, I'm done. I am like on the brink of collapsing. And then I find my seats, and they're up again about 40 steps, really, really high up. So I went and asked one of the stewards, like, what's going on? I've got a disability. Why am I in seats up a whole load of steps? I can't do that. So they take me down to the disabled area, which is basically, it's not a disabled area, it's a wheelchair viewing platform. So there are no seats. There's just a flat platform where you can obviously wheel a wheelchair up to, and they have a better view. I wasn't in a wheelchair. So I got there, and they said, well, there you go, that's your lot. You're going to have to sit here. And I was like, where? And I still remember to this day, this steward just looking at me and going, sit on the floor. As if it was nothing, as if I hadn't dressed up and paid all this money to go to this concert and to just sit on the floor. And that was the point where I had a panic attack. I think I fell to the floor. I couldn't breathe. I was sobbing. It was just too much. And again, I remember just being dismissed. This steward saying to my friend, oh, my wife does this sometimes. She's a bit hysterical too. Just, a hysterical woman being passed off. Again, my needs were not met. And then coming out of this concert, and then I did get help in a wheelchair because I had no energy to get back out of there. And there was a queue for the disabled toilets. And I hope things have changed since then. This was 8 years ago now, so quite a while. And just being rushed to the front of this disabled queue with ambulant disabled people, so people that are standing, people that also have invisible disabilities. There might have been 1 or 2 that just joined the queue because, we're British, they need the toilet, join a queue. But I would imagine most people are there for a valid reason to use a disabled toilet. And this steward just rushed me to the front of the queue and said, they don't have anything wrong with them. They're all standing. She needs the toilet more than anyone else because she's in a wheelchair and they're not. And I just remember thinking, oh my God, I'm mortified. I'm so sorry. There's nothing left in me to say anything right now. But this was how narrow-minded a lot of people were, and probably still are. So this panic attack happened in 2016, and from around that time, I was really struggling with a lot of anxiety. I had in my head that if I go out, something bad's going to happen. If I go out, I need to plan and plan and plan and plan and plan. Because if I planned properly, things like this wouldn't have happened. So this took over my life. Just going to the shops, I wouldn't be able to go and drive to like the big Tesco on a Saturday morning, for example. Oh my God, hell no. Too many people, couldn't park, too busy, can't walk around. So I would end up going out of my way to find the smaller supermarkets. I remember there was one nearby, Tesco Metro. They always inflate the prices because they're small supermarkets rather than the big ones. But it meant the supermarket was a lot smaller, the parking was a lot closer, so I could get in there and generally do my shop. I also realise now, because of having ADHD and executive functioning issues, that even things like planning a food shop, which I will admit I still struggle with now, I'm working on it, things like that were just, no, too much to deal with, too many barriers. So I would then end up having to go to the shops. So there's all of these barriers that were always in the way. and I'd end up spending more money. So this anxiety really took me over for a very long time. So there's a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. I do not remember feeling safe in myself at all at that time. My boyfriend at the time was quite supportive with my health because he had a disabled brother, but he was also quite abusive he was quite manipulative. There was some issues in that relationship. Yeah, he was definitely not a nice person, unfortunately. And I see his mother, and I see why. So, I have compassion there. But anyway, I was getting some support, but not a huge deal. A lot of what I was doing, a lot of the people I was attracting in my life were coming to me because I could give them something. And I was seeing that my value was in what I could offer. So if I was generous, if I was kind, if I did things for people, then therefore they would like me. It's taken me a long time to realise I can just turn up as my authentic self and people still like me. People actually like me a lot more. The right kinds of people like me when I'm just being myself. If I have to control how I am, who I am, I don't really want to be around those people. So again, lessons with hindsight. I think I'll leave it there for my story so far. I know it's been a lot and I really appreciate you listening. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about my recovery and what actually got me better from a lot of this stuff in the next episode. So I hope you stay tuned for the next one to hear about my recovery. Thank you for listening to this episode of Heal Your Nervous System. I hope you found the conversation as interesting as I did. If you would like to start healing your nervous system, I have a free energy diary available just for podcast listeners, which will really help you see your blind spots about how you're spending your time and your energy. Find it at jennyadamscoach.co.uk/podcast. Find out more about me and somatic coaching in the show notes below. See you next time.